Now, former New South Wales Fire and Rescue Commissioner Greg Mullins has long been calling for more resources for fire services, and he joins us now. Greg Mullins, welcome. So 6 million hectares of land burnt through now in New South Wales and Victoria. How dangerous are the coming couple of months going to be?
Look, what worries former fire chiefs, current fire chiefs, is that we're just coming into the time when the southern states start to burn. So they're already burning. You've already got fires threatening property in Tasmania, which is almost unheard of. You've got South Australia, southwest Western Australia, Victoria, and New South Wales is still ablaze. So this is what we've been concerned about with climate change, is simultaneous fire seasons. They used to be progressive, so we used to be able to share resources. That's why you see the US and Canadian and New Zealand firefighters coming in, because it's really stretched the capabilities. The worst fires in Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia were always in February, so this might just be the beginning.
Now, you've long been asking for extra resources for firefighting groups across the country. The Prime Minister was asked about this yesterday, just in terms of resources. Has it all been a little too late? Let's take a listen to what the Prime Minister had to say yesterday.
The response that we made was to provide the additional funding last year of 11 million and this year of 11 million, which brought it up to the level that was being sought in those years. And in this year's budget, that will be provided again on an ongoing basis. And so after becoming Prime Minister, they were matters that we put in train with that additional funding and resource. And as was noted yesterday, at 8 p.m. the previous evening, we received the request for an additional water bombing asset, and we moved to provide 4 with an additional 20 million. So when you look at that over the scheme over the last couple of years and the additional resource that has been provided on top of our standing commitment of 15 million, it means that the resources were delivered and now will ensure are there on an ongoing basis.
The Prime Minister speaking there yesterday. So, Greg Mullins, the Prime Minister's point there is that he says he's taken expert advice and he's provided what the experts have asked for. What's your take on that?
Look, firstly, my group, Emergency Leaders for Climate Action, say 30 former fire and emergency chiefs from every state and territory and the federal government. We do welcome the fact that the federal government's providing extra resources. The issue is we were asking back in April. They sat on a business case from the current fire chiefs for nearly 2 years. They put in another 11 million in December, late December or mid-December, when there was a lot of media pressure, and now there's extra money. Let's put all that aside. It's great to see the extra money, but there needs to be more consultation. What we've seen, my group and I, is that this seems to be a government that just does not like to consult. It seems to be management by news grab.
But the Prime Minister says he has been consulting the experts in the existing fire authorities around the country and has done what they've asked for. You've been pushing for extra resources. You're not the existing fire commissioner, and he takes advice from his existing experts.
At last, and that's what we pushed for, because they weren't listening to the existing fire chiefs. They didn't have an ear in Canberra. And we're very pleased. We actually want to go and retire. I'm a volunteer firefighter now. I'd rather be out on a truck at the moment, helping out my colleagues. But it's great to see things finally moving. But I hope in the future this government will learn to listen to people on the front line and will actually, rather than trying to say it's all state and territory responsibility, recognise a national crisis and catastrophe when it occurs.
In his media conference yesterday, the Prime Minister also made some comments about climate change and his government's approach to climate change. Let's take a listen to what he said.
I should stress that there is no dispute in this country about the issue of climate change globally and its effect on global weather patterns, and that includes how that impacts in Australia. Because I have to correct the record here. I've seen a number of people suggest that somehow the government does not make this connection. The government, our leaders, always made that connection, and that has never been in dispute.
Scott Morrison speaking there yesterday. So Greg Mullins, Scott Morrison goes on to say, and he says this repeatedly, that the government will meet and beat its Paris targets. So he says the government is taking climate change seriously. What's your opinion on that?
What a load of rubbish.
But you can't.
So we'll meet and beat the Paris targets by using credits from the very weak Kyoto targets that were set for Australia. And emissions under this government went up every year for 5 years. They've gone down slightly this year because of the drought and less emissions in the agricultural sector. So not through government action. I worry about my grandchildren, their grandchildren. If this is how it is now, this is driven by climate change. Imagine what future generations are up against. And if Australia doesn't take moral leadership on this, like we did with apartheid, nuclear weapons, things that we didn't even have a 1.3% stake in, but we spoke loudly from a moral base, we can't talk to Brazil, India, China or America about their emissions. So it's about our grandkids, and we need to take action and not pretend.
The Prime Minister has repeatedly defended the use of those carryover credits in recent media conferences. Why do you say they have to be dropped? And if your argument clearly is they should be dropped, what other elements should there be to a credible climate policy?
Well, if you look around the world at countries that are actually taking action on climate change, it's right across transport, agriculture, energy, every sector. There are strategies to reduce emissions. There are not in Australia. And Mother Nature doesn't understand dodgy spreadsheets. So if the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases go up, it gets warmer. Mother Nature gets more and more angry, and we're on the front of that right now.
Okay, turning to another issue around this, there's been a frequent discussion through this crisis about hazard reduction. That's what the Prime Minister says he's come across frequently with his visits to fire-affected grounds, with people saying there needs to be more done. The New South Wales Environment Minister today says there needs to be more hazard reduction. And the Victorian Black Saturday Bushfires Royal Commission report, it recommended that in Victoria that they undertake at least 385,000 hectares of planned burning a year. Last year that was 74,000. This year it's 130,000. What's your view on the discussion around hazard reduction?
Look, the fuel reduction is a critical factor in fire control. But like climate change, if you did something right now, it's not going to make much of an effect in the future. Actually, in New South Wales, we won't need to do much hazard reduction for quite a number of years, because most of the forested areas in the state are being burnt, and they will burn until it rains. The issue in extreme drought like this, underpinned by 20 years of reduced rainfall, so 15 to 20% reduction in winter rainfall, which has meant our window for hazard reduction is very narrow now, because it's either too wet or too dangerous to burn. A reduction over decades in forestry and national parks personnel who are out there doing the hazard reduction, so it's fallen to volunteers, and we're mainly only available on weekends. So there's all these factors, but it's what annoyed ex-fire chiefs, I suppose, was it was being used as an attack. The greenies are stopping burning. It's actually not true. There's a range of factors, so we do need to look at fuel reduction strategies, and also take note that in these extreme conditions, I was fighting fires in Bateman's Bay on New Year's Eve. We had 1 metre flames running across people's front lawns. So in extreme conditions with extreme dryness, everything will burn. That's why we can't put these fires out. So fuel reduction is not a panacea. Firefighting aircraft are not a panacea. There needs to be new thinking on how we deal with this ongoing crisis into the future. There'll be planning standards, building standards, how we use federal government agencies like the ADF, which we called for, but were mocked by the Prime Minister for asking for that some months ago. But we do need to work out how we're going to deal with this. And California, I've recently been in California on fires, the best resourced firefighting place in the world, really, and they can't cope with the fires driven by climate change, so they're having a huge rethink how they do it. So fuel reduction is part of the picture. but that's all.
Yeah, and so it's part of the picture. Are you willing to offer an opinion now on whether you think it needs to be increased or decreased, or is that?
Oh, look, it certainly needs to be increased. And back onto this thing of blaming Greens, people like the Nature Conservation Council, even the Greens themselves, their policies are they support burning, because ecology in New South Wales, dry sclerophyll forest around where I live, if you exclude fire, lots of species die. Lots of species of plant rely on fire to regenerate, so there must be fire in the landscape. And so there's actually no one saying to exclude fire. And yes, there needs to be more hazard reduction in the future, but you've got about a 5-year window where we probably won't need any.
Right. Okay. Another point of discussion is the possibility of a royal commission out of this, because everyone is now saying this is an unprecedented situation. Gladys Berejiklian was making that very clear yesterday. Do you think a royal commission would be productive?
That's a difficult question, because frankly, in the past, some royal commissions have been used to apportion blame. And we've seen in Victoria, after 2009, fire chiefs lost their jobs, the police chief. If it's to apportion blame on people, it's not productive. If it's along the lines of what can we learn, and if the terms of reference of the Royal Commission were to look at all factors, including how climate change has supercharged the bushfire problem, I think it would be a good thing. But if it's about apportioning blame or letting people graze their cows in national parks, no, it'll be a waste of time. There's many, many recommendations from so many bushfire inquiries over the years. I don't know what more they could come up with. So the new angle would be, what is climate change doing to our bushfire problem?
Yeah. Okay, Greg Mullins, thanks so much for coming and have a chat to us.
Thank you.